Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is evening time here, wherever you are in the world. It's Jose here, welcoming you to another episode of Amazing Worlds, where today I just want to talk about my view of comics and what I consider comics to be and something that they can be, as opposed to a lot of mainstream people's perception. When you say you're into comics, they straight away think about Marvel, DC, but for me, or to me, they are something completely different. But before that, let me introduce you to the non-sponsor of the channel at all, because I'm not sponsored by anyone. La Sagra is a Spanish craft beer company, and this is a triple ale blonde, 9.1% alcohol. So let's get started, and then I'll get talking. Perhaps I'll become more loquacious as it goes on with the sponsor class, of course. Cheers to all of you. I hope you're safe. I hope you're fine. Very tasty. A lot of flavor here. Right, so let's get started. Comics. Comics can be many things. This is a form of art. It's the ninth art. They can deal with any topic. They can be for like any kind of art. They can be for entertainment purposes. They can be for education purposes. So I really like my comics to be for education purposes. So today I've brought a selection here from my collection of 7 comic books, the top 7 comic books for me, not top 7, 7 comic books that deal with journalistic comics. And obviously, as it couldn't be any other way, this is a bit cliched, but we have to start with Mouse by Art Spiegelman. I think it's the only comic book to date to have won the Pulitzer Prize to have won the Pulitzer Prize. Mouse just deals, it's drawn and written by Art Spiegelman. Art Spiegelman, American journalist who, through interviews with his father, who was a survivor of the concentration camps during World War II, his father was Jewish, and what was really groundbreaking at the time is that Mouse depicts the Germans as cats, the Jews as mice, hence the title Mouse. It takes place in Poland, so the Polish as represented as pigs, suppose because they eat a lot of pork, perhaps, and the Americans are depicted as dogs. So obviously, it's Americans, dogs beating the cats were chasing the mice. Anyway, the thing about that bestialization of people, of humans, what it allowed was to tell some really harrowing stories in a way that didn't feel too strong, too harsh, too visceral. And what was really interesting is that through the conversations with his father, Art Spiegelman realized that in spite of having been persecuted by the Nazis for the sake of being Jewish, when his father moved to the US in his late life, his own father had racist views, opinions, or biases towards black people in America. So he reflects on the dichotomy, on the absurdity, on that, for want of a better word, inconsistent pattern of how could you have gone through what you went through and still think of other people as, whatever. So a really personal, a thoroughly recommendable comic book. Like I said, if you go down this route of journalistic comics, Mouse is always going to be top of the list for anyone. Next, I've got something, one of my favorite journalistic comic book writers, and I think he deserves for me to do an own episode. I've chosen this one. I've got pretty much all of them, but Joe Sacco. This is the Spanish edition of Palestine in the Gaza Strip. Joe Sacco is an American journalist of Maltese origin who, back in the 90s, he traveled around Europe. So he's got books in the Sarajevo during the Balkan War, in Bosnia. He did another one, I think, in Belgrade, Palestine. He's got a couple of them, and then earlier this year I missed out, but he's got one on fracking and mining in the Indian reservations in the US. So I really want to get my hands on that. I think that's going to be a present to myself at some point in 2021. I've chosen Palestine as I could have chosen footnotes in Gaza or Sarajevo or any of the others. His style, his drawing style is very personal. It's almost very cartoonish, but yet he does really capture people's expressions and people's sort of personalities through his sort of very exaggerated, like I said, almost cartoonish impersonation. There's a lot of text here. There's a lot of history in his books. It's a great way to learn about these things. And Joe Sacco, he really does go into war-torn areas in the middle of the war. He puts himself there, and he writes himself there. He draws himself there, interviewing people, interacting with people, being caught in the middle of a shootout between Palestinians and Israelis, and he doesn't claim to be, he doesn't appear to be super brave or super strong. He's just a normal man doing his thing, talking to normal people, talking to survivors, talking to the average person that had to live through these conflicts. Joe Sacco, I discovered him, I just randomly picked up one of his books, and since then I've been progressively getting all of them, because I think I don't think there's anyone like him out there, and I think Joe Sacco probably should be recommended reading in some university courses. Next, I've picked up again Guy Delisle. He's a French-Canadian cartoonist who travels around the world because his wife works for Doctors Without Borders. So every so often they go to a different country. So he's got a whole series. I've picked up Pyongyang, which is a journey in North Korea. So they lived there, his wife worked there, and then what Guy Delisle does is he tries to teach animation, graphic design, while his wife does the Doctors Without Borders charity work thing, and he just interacts and walks around town and sort of presents his impressions on the day-to-day things that happen to him. He's not as out there in terms of on the face of danger as Joe Sacco is. He even references Joe Sacco in one of his books, in the Chronicles from Jerusalem. At one point, when he said that he was a comic artist, he was actually detained at the border because he got confused with Joe Sacco, who apparently wasn't allowed to go into Israel at the time. The art isn't great. The art is almost comic strippy. It's very simplistic. And the stories aren't as deep or as harsh as the Joe Sacco work, because this is just him walking around town, just living what an expat would, how an expat would live in these areas. But again, just very interesting personal takes. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there in the world that go and live in places like this, but none of them present their experiences in such a way. Another book that I picked up, which apparently got turned into a movie, is another one quite famous, Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. This is the personal account of a lady, so author herself, Marjane Satrapi, a lady who leaves Iran when the Taliban arrive, and so as a kid, as a young girl, she lived through the changes in Iran. The Taliban take over, restrictions on women, all the impositions they put on women, how the freedom was curtailed. Eventually, she fled the country and settled in France. And this is her account of what she remembered, how she escaped, and just giving her personal take on it. So it's a very personal story, first-hand account of how the Taliban affected people. She's not a hero. She doesn't purport to have done anything overly courageous. She just escaped the repressive regime, and this is her story. Another one that I picked up, I don't think this is any major comic. It's not. It's a small volume, but I think it's quite. It's a very touching story. It's a very moving story, and it's Dio Gracious, I suppose you would call it. You pronounce it in English. It's a tale of Rwanda. So this is a story of a kid, little kid by the name of Dio Gracious, who survived the Rwandan genocide, the massive genocide, the killings between the Hutu and the Tutsi ethnic groups in Rwanda, and what it was like. So he's completely gone off his. I mean, this kid is so traumatized by what he had to do and what he lived through and what he saw during the genocide that he's crazy, and he's picked up and looked after by a mission, a Christian mission in Rwanda, and there's a bit of this his story of how he lived through the conflict, but also how he carries out some sort of revenge in his state. It's not a first-hand account of anything. It's a fictional story, but again, if you're of a certain age like me, you will remember in the news it was all over the media when this thing happened, and it was a tragedy. And like many things that happen in Africa, we don't care as much as if they happened somewhere else in the world. Next, I've got another big volume here by an author that I really respect, an author that I really like, he's got a couple of works on this. I've got them here. I picked this one. Again, this is the Spanish edition, but this is by French artist and writer Jacques Tardi, and this one is called The War of the Trenches, 1914-1918. So it's a story of what it was like to be in the first line of the front during World War One. And he's got another story in the French original called Putain de guerre, which I think translates to the fucking war. Pardon my French, no pun intended. But they are really, really gritty, horrid Battle of the Somme. World War One, trenches, the development of chemical weapons and flamethrowers, and the sort of almost face-to-face shooting during the trenches in World War One, and it's a different way to get a feel for what it must have been like there. Something that perhaps you can watch a movie, I suppose. There's been plenty of movies about the war. You can read a book, but comics can do it as well. They are a legitimate form of communication and a legitimate form of art. And as a teacher, I can see why some schools, some universities shouldn't have these in their libraries. Finally, I've got a very peculiar book, and it's not quite a comic, it's not quite a book, it's not quite a photographic report, but it's called it's a massive book, as you can see. That's The Photographer by Guibert, Lefevre and Lemercier. So French photographer. So basically, this is again a personal account. Emmanuel Guibert was a photographer, hence the title of the book, who left Paris in 1986 into war-torn Afghanistan during the Taliban uprising. and he photographed his trip and his experience in there. And he went with Doctors Without Borders on a sort of to report on the work and the charity work that they did and everything. And at one point, he decided he left Afghanistan. It was middle of winter. I can't quite remember the story. I read a few years ago. But basically, he left Afghanistan and crossed into Pakistan through the Guibert Pass, so the big mountains there in the middle of winter, where he nearly died on his solo crossing of the mountains. And then he died young, the age of 49. And then what happened is that artist Didier Lefevre, he took all his photos from the trip, and there are hundreds of photos, and then stitched them together in a cohesive story through comic format, cartoon. So this book mixes comic panels to give the story cohesion and narrative consistency and a plot with the hundreds of black and white photographs that Lefevre took during his trip. And it's just a unique mix of comic as a storytelling device and photography as evidence and as journalism in its more pure essence. And it's sometimes shocking to see. So you can spend a couple of pages in comic book format where they're telling you something that you find difficult to believe, and then you got the photos next to it to see what they are actually telling you happened and it's true. And there are some harsh photos of mutilations, people, injuries, the poverty, the destruction that took place in Afghanistan during the Taliban uprising. So this is a very unique work. I mean, here at the back, the blurb, the recommendations: New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Boston Globe, Washington Post, Publishers Weekly, books list. I mean, it's again, it's just pure journalism, isn't it? And I think for me, these sort of books raise comic books into an art, because I think that is actually what they are, is a form of art, just like movies can be, just like painting can be, just like photography, just like literature. And every form of art has got two primary means, or ends, I should say: to entertain and to educate. Superheroes entertain, and comics can educate as well. Anyway, this is what I had for today. Some of those books and some of those comics and some of those authors, I think, are worth more of my time, more of people's time. They deserve a much better job than what I could have done here today. And possibly Joe Sacco deserves a whole episode that I will do at some point in the future. But for now, festive season is almost upon us. My friends across the pond in America, you had Thanksgiving, so I hope you enjoyed that. Nothing like that over here. We don't do that. As you may know. Anyway, people, thank you ever so much for watching. Hello to my new subscribers. Please, please, please like, subscribe, comment, spread the message, spread the love. Tell me what you think. Take lots of care. And I'll see you next time. Bye.